We're in Judges chapter 2. And since we're entering into a new era, we had conquest last week. You know what that means? You get to sing the song that I know you walk around humming every day.
Joshua, Samson, David, Rehoboam, Daniel, Ezra, followed by the Pharisees.
All right, by the time y'all learn this little song, you know all the eras of the Old Testament, and you will understand about how God took a group of people and formed a nation out of them. All right, so today this is lesson 11 of 20, so we're over halfway through. Now, you ever wonder why the book of Ruth is in the Bible? I mean, it's a nice love story and all that, but it takes place in this period of Judges, in this era. And here's a verse 1 of Ruth chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, so a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. So we find out Ruth takes place during this era. And we're going to see the importance of Ruth a little bit later. But first of all, we got Judges chapter 2. Now, of course, we had the conquest last week, and we saw the walls of Jericho fall and all that. But verse 6 says, after Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to his own inheritance. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him, and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaas. And here's a sad verse. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. I think that's what's going on in our nation. We have a whole generation growing up that do not know the Lord, do not care to know him. And I think we may see some of the things that happened to Israel happen to us. It's very troubling. One generation can go from following the Lord to not even knowing him. So our next generation is very important to train. And our grandkids, very important to try to teach them whatever they will listen to and learn. Look at verse 11. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the, sometimes we pronounce it Baals. It's actually Baals. It's 2 syllables in Hebrew. And if you want to know what, I'll just call it Baal. That's what everybody calls it. here's what Baal is. It's a Canaanite storm god who was thought to send rain and nurturing weather for crops, also known as the god of fertility. So that's what he is, and everybody started to worship him instead of Yahweh. And look at verse 12. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the people around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreth. Now, who are the Ashtoreth, you wonder? Well, here they are. This is nothing but a female Baal, okay? And that they would carve the image into a little tree with no limbs on it, plant it in the ground, and that was known as an Asherah pole. And you'll see this all in the Old Testament.
They had lots of little, they had them so they could just hold them in their hand.
Yeah, they had these little
And
carved out gods that they used.
Jezebel was one that really pushed that.
Yeah.
She pushed it.
Yeah. Verse 14. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. Then the Lord raised up judges, who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshipped them. They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors who had been obedient to the Lord's commands. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies, as long as the judge lived. So the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and said, because this nation has violated the commandment I ordained for their ancestors and has not listened to me, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations Joshua left before he died. I will use them to test Israel to see whether they will keep the way of the Lord and walk in the way as their ancestors did. The Lord had allowed those nations to remain. He did not drive them out at once by giving them into the hands of Joshua. So what we see here all through the book of Judges is a pattern. And here's the pattern. The first thing that would happen is that the people would sin daily through idolatry and intermarriage. They weren't even supposed to intermarry with these people, but they did. They just didn't listen. Then God would punish them by sending a nation to oppress them. I wonder what nation is going to oppress us.
Several.
They're lining up, aren't they? Then the people would repent and pray for deliverance. Then God would send a judge to deliver them from the oppressor. And then there would be a period of peace. And then guess what? The cycle would start over and over and over again. Now, what was a judge exactly? It wasn't this. This was not a judge, and this was not a judge. Although I guess it wouldn't hurt to have Doug Llewellyn bombard you with questions after you left. I guess y'all remember that guy. Doug Llewellyn always interviewed the people after Judge Wapner got through with them. Judges were more like this. They were more military leaders. Actually, there was only one judge that really acted more like what we would call a judge, and that was Deborah. She used to hold meetings under I think it was called the Palm of Deborah. They named a tree after her. So that's what happened, just a cycle after cycle. And we can look at Judges chapter 4 to see about Deborah. Judges chapter 4, verse 4. Now Deborah, a prophet and wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. So the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. So she was about the only one who actually looked more like what we'd call a judge. Everybody else was pretty much military leaders. So what was life like under these oppressive nations? We find that in Judges chapter 6. And I didn't put it on the screen. Judges chapter 6, verse 1. Here's how life was. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock in their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. So he sent them a judge. And we'll see who that was shortly. There were 12 judges in all. Here's the first three. Othniel, he went to war with the king of Aram. I think Aram was around Syria, and defeated him, and the land had peace for 40 years. And then Ehud killed the king of Moab. It's interesting to read how he did it. He told him he had a secret message for him, so that king ran everybody out. Okay, what's the secret message? And his secret message was a sword in the stomach. And then he slipped out the back way, and the servants were still out there. And they thought, well, what's taking the king so long? They thought he was in the bathroom. But instead, he was gone. He was dead. So that's how he killed him. Shamgar struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. And I bet you're wondering, what is an ox goad? And here's a definition of an ox goad. It's a rod generally about 8 feet long with a pointed end used to control oxen. So I guess you would kind of jab them to make them move, to goad them. And but this was quite a weapon too, I suppose. 8 foot long. Had very, very good reach. Next we have Deborah. She helped somebody kill the king of Canaan, and he ran and hid in a woman's tent, and she gave him a real bad headache with a tent stake. And so that took care of him. Gideon, he's an interesting character. He defeated these Midianites. He had 32,000 men he was going to attack them with, and God said, you got too many. And so he carved it down to 10,000, and God said, you still got too many. And he carved it down to 300. And the people he picked, the 300, were people, the way they drank water like a dog, lapped it up in their hands. And so the story of Gideon is quite interesting. That's where you see he placed this fleece out, for kind of a fleece prayer, I guess you might call it, twice, and to make sure that God was serious. Now this next guy, Abimelech, he was not a true judge. He tried to make himself a judge. He says, I'm a judge. Well, God didn't make him a judge. And he killed 70 of his brothers. Nice guy, wasn't he? He missed one. And he was attacking these other people, and a woman dropped a millstone over the wall and hit him in the head, and he was laying there, and he told his armor bearer to please kill him because he didn't want to die at the hands of a woman. He had that much pride, so that's how he went, but he was not a judge. He just called himself a judge. There's Tola, led Israel for 23 years, not much to hear about him. Jair had 30 sons who rode donkeys, who ruled 30 towns. But he only led Israel for 22 years. I thought he should lead Israel for 30 years to kind of follow that pattern, but he didn't. And Jephthah, he was the stupidest of all the judges. Let's read about him. Look at Judges chapter 11. I'm going to show you what this idiot did. Verse 30. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, if you give the Amorites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me, I will return in triumph from the Amorites. From the Amorites will be the Lord's. I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. So Jephthah went over to fight the Amorites, and the Lord gave them to his hands. He devastated 20 towns from Aoir to the vicinity of Minnith, as far as Abel Keramim. Thus Israel subdued Ammon. Don't you just love the Old Testament reading these things? When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter? Dancing to the sound of timbrels, she was an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "Oh, my daughter, you have brought me down. I am devastated. I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." "My father," she replied, "you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me just as you promised. Now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Amorites. But grant me this one request," she said. "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." "You may go," he said, and then he let her go for 2 months. She and her friends went into the hills and wept because she would never marry. After 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed, and she was a virgin. From this is the Israelite tradition that each year young women of Israel go out for 4 days to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. So be very careful what vows you make to the Lord.
Kind of a waste.
It was, and say the Lord didn't want that sacrifice because he doesn't want people sacrificed. So I think he could have got out of it myself.
I kind of agree with you.
Yeah. The next fellow is Ibzan, I guess. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters and ruled Israel for 7 years. Elon led Israel for 10 years. Abdon had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode 70 donkeys and led Israel for 8 years. Can you imagine that crowd at the family reunion, all these donkeys riding up? 70 donkeys riding up there. Parking was a problem. But then there was the most famous of all, Mr. Samson. And he wasn't the brightest bulb in the chandelier either when it came to some things. And we can read about him in Judges chapter 16. Verse 4. This is old Samson. Now, he'd done all these mighty things, and every time he started to do a mighty feat, the Spirit of the Lord would come upon him. And he was very strong and very powerful, and they couldn't handle him. Well, here's verse 4. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek. That, by the way, is in the area of Judah, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so that we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." Samson answered her, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I will become weak as any other man." Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the room, she called him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the bowstrings as easy as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. You know, he should have figured out something with this first event, shouldn't he? He did not have an amazing grasp of the obvious. Verse 10. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have made a fool out of me. You lied to me. Come now and tell me how you can be tied." He said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any man." So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. Then with men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were threads. You would think. Verse 13. Delilah then said to Samson, "All this time you have been making a fool out of me." Oh, well, who's the fool here? But and lying to me. "Tell me how you can be tied," he replied. If you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with a pin, I become weak as any other man." So while he was sleeping, Delilah took some 7 braids of his head and roped them in the fabric and tightened them with the pin. Again she called him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." You know, there's a pattern here. Let's see. He awoke from his sleep and pulled up the pin in the loom with the fabric. Then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you have made a fool out of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." You know, having Philistines hiding in the room 3 different times, you would think would kind of set off some kind of alarm, wouldn't you?
I don't think he had even a bulb to light it.
No, he was just a big dummy.
He was a very strong.
Yeah, verse 16. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. He told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become weak as any other man." So Delilah saw that he had told her everything. She sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, "Come back once more. He has told me everything." So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke from his sleep and thought, "I'll go out as before and shake myself free," but he did not know that the Lord had left him. So they captured him, and they were having this big party, and they had him tied to 2 pillars, you know, and he kind of had the ropes there. Well, what they forgot to do, his hair started growing back out, and they forgot to give him a trim every once in a while, and he pulled the pillars down and killed a bunch of Philistines. And but he just was not all that bright. Look at Judges chapter 21. And this is a key verse right here to lead us into the next era. Next week will be the kingdom, and we'll have 3 lessons in that. Verse 25. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. So that's the state of Israel. And this is going to lead us into the next era, the kingdom. They will have a king. And the first one doesn't work out too good. But the very last judge is really a transitional judge named Samuel. His mother's one of my favorite women biblical characters, Hannah. I really like her. So this is going to lead us into the kingdom era, and Samuel is the one who will anoint the king. And so we continue to wind up our golden string, and back to the book of Ruth. You remember, this is in the days of the Judges, and the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz. And who did Boaz marry? Ruth. Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. So, see, our golden string, we ended with Solomon last week in the conquest. He married who? Rahab. See, it's all coming together, isn't it? The big picture. So Solomon has Boaz. Well, our next person, I skipped a few people in there. Boaz, who married Ruth. Boaz has a son named Obed, who has a son named Jesse. And Jesse is going to have this little old insignificant shepherd boy named David, who we'll see next week. So as we end the era of Judges and move into the kingdom, and things get really interesting there too. So there we have it. We'll have time for some Q&A or anything anybody's noticed. Roy?
What's the main difference in the prophets and the judges?
Well, the judges were mostly military leaders. The prophets were receiving words from the Lord, and they were, when we get to the prophets, they are talking to the kings. Kings don't always listen, but so the prophets are bringing the word of the Lord straight to the kings. Anybody else? I forgot to turn off my email. Anything else? Or y'all must be ready to eat. That's all y'all think about is food. That's all I think about too.